The swimming pool wasn't just a pleasant feature of my Oak Haven Estates house. It was the very axis around which my decision to buy this specific property turned. Here, where Florida summers relentlessly bake the asphalt into submission and manicured lawns wage a constant, thirsty war against the sun. My backyard pool was a shimmering rectangle of liquid sanity. It was my private oasis, a cerulean escape hatch from the pressures of long work weeks designing secure network architectures. It was the silent centerpiece of quiet weekends, spent floating aimlessly, and the backdrop for occasional, low-key gatherings with a small circle of trusted friends. Maintaining it was a ritual, the meticulous balancing of chemicals, the hypnotic glide of the vacuum across the floor, the regular skimming of fallen oak leaves, the patio swept clean. It represented a significant investment, not merely financial, but an ongoing commitment of time, effort, and frankly, love. My name is Mark Ashton, and that pool wasn't just water and concrete, it was the crown jewel of my small suburban kingdom. A kingdom I increasingly felt compelled to defend against the encroaching forces of neighborhood busybodies and the insidious creep of HOA overreach. Oak Haven Estates, on its glossy brochure surface, projected an image of idyllic suburban harmony. Tree-lined streets, coordinated mailbox designs, the gentle hum of sprinklers in the early morning quiet. But beneath this carefully curated veneer pulsed the ever-present, often capricious, heart of the Homeowners Association. Like countless HOAs across the nation, it likely began with noble intentions, preserving property values, ensuring a baseline level of communal tidiness. But also, like many HOAs, certain personalities embedded within its structure seem to regard the thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions not as a framework for peaceful coexistence, but as a quiver filled with arrows of personal power, ready to be launched at anyone perceived to be out of step. The most prominent, and often most jarring, wielder of such perceived authority in our particular section of Oak Haven was Patricia Langley. Patricia resided 2 doors down, a seemingly innocuous distance. However, the layout of our lots meant her backyard abutted the same narrow strip of common green space as mine. This geographical misfortune granted her a clear, unobstructed, and frequently utilized view over the relatively low backyard fences mandated, with deep irony, by the very HOA aesthetic code she so zealously enforced. Patricia was a woman perpetually radiating an aura of imminent complaint, her default expression a strained rictus somewhere between forced pleasantness and barely concealed disapproval. She held the official title of Social Committee Chair, a role that appeared to have significantly inflated her sense of self-importance and her perceived jurisdiction over all neighborhood happenings, social or otherwise. My prior interactions with Patricia had been confined to minor, eye-rolling skirmishes, the kind endemic to HOA living. A passive-aggressive note slipped into my mailbox, lamenting the excessive and frankly unpleasant chlorine odor emanating from my pool area on a particularly still, humid afternoon. My chlorine levels, checked daily, were scientifically perfect. A thinly veiled complaint, voiced during a chance encounter while retrieving garbage bins, about the rather bold and unapproved shade of my new patio umbrella. It was a standard, unassuming navy blue, hardly a revolutionary statement. Patricia, or Karen, as some less charitable neighbors referred to her in hushed, weary tones behind cupped hands, operated under the unshakable conviction that her personal opinions constituted objective facts and her desires were essentially community directives awaiting compliance. The neighborhood's private social media feed practically caught fire when Patricia announced her engagement to a man whose primary visible quality seemed to be bewildered patience. This was followed, in short order, by the bombshell announcement of her intention to host the wedding reception in her own backyard. Given the relatively modest size of standard Oak Haven lots, this plan immediately raised eyebrows throughout the community. It wasn't just ambitious, it bordered on logistical fantasy. Whispers immediately began circulating, polite but strained congratulations from some, deep, heartfelt sighs of anticipated inconvenience from others who had prior experience with Patricia's penchant for orchestrating dramatic events with minimal regard for neighborly consideration. Her infamous holiday extravaganza 2 years prior had resulted in blocked driveways, trampled flower beds, and noise complaints well past midnight. Soon, the tangible signs of impending nuptials began appearing around her property. Sleek cars disgorged wedding planners clad in sharp business attire, wielding clipboards like weapons. Florists arrived with measuring tapes, assessing fence lines and available space with critical eyes. Stern-faced caterers conducted site surveys, muttering about power outlets and level ground, and disturbingly often, their consultations seemed to involve lingering, speculative gazes directed over the fence towards my backyard specifically, towards the shimmering, cool allure of my swimming pool. Patricia herself began dropping pointed hints during our infrequent encounters. "Mark, darling," she trilled one sweltering afternoon, intercepting me as I wrestled my recycling bin to the curb. Her voice was laced with a forced, breathy urgency. "Wedding planning is simply madness, utter chaos, trying to ensure every single guest is perfectly comfortable, especially with this dreadful summer heat bearing down on us." She fanned herself dramatically with a flyer she'd plucked from her mailbox. "It's simply crucial, don't you think, to have adequate cooling facilities readily available for the guests. It makes the entire event so much more pleasant, elevates the whole experience. A backyard wedding is certainly ambitious." "Patricia," I replied, keeping my tone carefully noncommittal, focusing on wrestling the bin lid shut. "Hope the weather cooperates for you." "Oh, we shall manage," she declared with an airy, dismissive wave of her hand, as if weather itself would bend to her will. Luckily, Oak Haven is blessed with such wonderful, shared community resources. It truly helps everyone enjoy these significant milestone moments together. The implication wasn't just unsubtle, it was practically neon lit. She clearly viewed my pool not as my private property, maintained at my expense and effort, but as a convenient, pre-existing amenity for her event, a communal water feature awaiting her guests. I decided then and there to erect a clear boundary before her assumptions solidified further. "Well, just so we're clear, Patricia," the first stated, turning to face her directly, my voice polite but firm. "My pool is strictly private property. Insurance liabilities alone make it impossible, not to mention basic privacy concerns. It's simply not available for external events or guests." Her smile tightened, the corners of her mouth pulling down almost imperceptibly. The forced pleasantness flickered for a fraction of a second. "Of course, darling. Understood," she murmured, her eyes briefly flicking towards my backyard again before she turned and glided away. "Just thinking about community spirit. You know." But I knew Patricia Langley. That wasn't understanding or acceptance. That was merely the end of the opening conversational salvo. The real campaign was yet to begin. The formal, unequivocal demand arrived approximately 3 weeks before the scheduled wedding date. I was meticulously trimming the hedges along my back fence line, enjoying the relative cool of the late afternoon, when a woman I instantly recognized as Patricia's lead wedding planner, Brenda Hofnagel, a severe-looking individual whose entire demeanor radiated caffeine, fueled impatience, and thinly veiled condescension, approached my locked-back gate. Patricia hovered just behind her, arms crossed defensively, a look of smug, regal expectation firmly planted on her face. "Mr. Ashton," Brenda called out, her voice sharp, businesslike, brooking no interruption. I switched off the hedge trimmer, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. "Yes, Brenda Hofnagel," she announced, as if stating her rank and serial number, representing P. Langley Wedding Coordination. "We are here to finalize the guest comfort and safety arrangements for Patricia's upcoming wedding reception." She gestured, not vaguely this time, but directly, pointedly, towards my pool. "Patricia has instructed me to formally inform you that your pool facilities will need to be prepared and fully accessible to her wedding guests during the reception hours on the afternoon of Saturday, the 16th. I stared at her, then shifted my gaze to Patricia, who offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming her decree. They weren't asking. They weren't requesting. They were informing. My initial disbelief curdled into slow-burning anger. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing my voice to remain level, betraying none of the fury churning inside. "There must be a significant misunderstanding. As I stated quite clearly to Patricia several weeks ago, my pool is private property. It is absolutely not available for her wedding guests." Brenda consulted her clipboard, tapping it with a pen, her expression suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse, perhaps intellectually deficient. "Patricia feels," she began, emphasizing the name, "and the Oak Haven Estates Social Committee guidelines implicitly support a blatant fabrication. I was certain, as no such guideline existed, that during significant community milestone events, such as a wedding hosted by a committee chair, residents are expected to cooperate fully to ensure optimal guest safety and comfort. The projected heat index for the 16th necessitates readily available access to cooling facilities. Your pool is the only suitable, proximate option. Implicit guidelines, even if they existed, do not supersede state property laws, homeowner insurance liability clauses, or my fundamental right to refuse access to my private residence," I retorted, my patience evaporating rapidly. The answer was no weeks ago, and it remains no. It is not happening. End of discussion. Patricia finally deigned to speak, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that failed utterly to mask the underlying steel. "Mark, darling, surely you wouldn't want to be the only neighbor perceived as being uncooperative, unneighborly. Think of the optics within the community." She paused for effect. "Besides, Brenda has thoughtfully arranged for standardized waiver forms for all guests who might choose to utilize the facility. Liability is completely covered. You have nothing to worry about. Waiver forms don't magically prevent accidents." "Patricia," I countered, my voice hardening. "Nor do they negate specific exclusion clauses in my homeowner's insurance policy regarding private, non-commercial use of the pool. And frankly, the only optic I am concerned with is the boundary of my own property and my right to privacy. The pool is closed to your event, unequivocally." Brenda Hofnagel took a step closer to the gate, her posture subtly menacing. "Mr. Ashton, let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice dropping slightly, taking on a threatening edge. "Patricia expects this cooperation. Failure to provide the requested access could potentially be construed as deliberately creating a hazardous condition for her invited guests by denying them necessary relief from extreme heat." Her eyes flickered towards my pool, filter equipment. "It could also, regrettably, necessitate a formal review by the relevant HOA committees of your property's ongoing compliance with certain aesthetic and safety standards, particularly concerning poolside areas and equipment visible to neighbors and their guests during properly announced hosted events. It was a threat, plain and simple, wrapped in pseudo-legal HOA jargon. Comply with our unreasonable demand, or we will weaponize the HOA rulebook against you. My jaw tightened. Are you actually threatening me with HOA violations if I don't let strangers use my private pool? I asked. The incredulity thickened my voice. We are simply outlining the potential ramifications of non-cooperation. Brenda snapped back curtly. We are ensuring Patricia's wedding day is perfect and safe for her guests. Access to the pool on the 16th. Consider it non-negotiable. We will be in touch later this week regarding managing guest flow logistics. And with that final, arrogant pronouncement, she and Patricia turned sharply and marched back towards Patricia's house, leaving me standing by my silent hedges, fuming, violated, and utterly incredulous at the sheer, unadulterated, weaponized entitlement. For hours, I paced my house, the confrontation replaying in my mind, each repetition fueling the fire of my indignation. How dare they? The presumption, the arrogance, the thinly veiled threats, the utter disregard for personal boundaries and property rights. My mind raced through potential countermoves, discarding each one. Argue with the HOA board. Risky. Patricia, as social committee chair, had cultivated allies. It could devolve into a protracted, he said, she said battle, potentially resulting in a compromise I couldn't stomach. Hire a lawyer. Expensive. Time-consuming. The wedding would likely be over before any legal action gained traction, and the damage potential trespassing. Arguments would already be done. Post no trespassing signs. Ineffective. They'd likely ignore them, claiming implicit permission via Patricia, or worse. Patricia would find an HOA rule prohibiting signs of that size or type and cite me for that. Build a higher fence. Expressly forbidden by HOA aesthetic guidelines. Ironically, the same guidelines Patricia seemed willing to ignore when it suited her. I needed something different. Something immediate, effective, undeniable. Something that didn't violate any actual HOA rules, but rendered their entire premise moot. Something that, preferably, turned their own entitled expectations and arrogant demands back on them in a suitably memorable, perhaps even absurd, fashion. My pool was the target, so the pool had to be the solution. If they couldn't swim in the pool, its perceived value as a cooling facility evaporated instantly. But how to make it unswimmable temporarily without causing permanent damage, creating a genuine safety hazard, or triggering legitimate HOA violations. Draining it completely was impractical, potentially damaging, and would raise too many questions. Dyeing the water some hideous color risked staining the plaster and was a guaranteed aesthetic citation. Adding something unpleasant like vinegar or soap would require a massive, costly water replacement afterward. But what if the water remained pristine, perfectly balanced, chemically sound, yet physically inaccessible? What if the pool wasn't empty, but rather full? Full of something completely unexpected. A slow, mischievous, slightly unhinged grin spread across my face. An idea, audacious and logistically challenging but poetically perfect, began to form. A ball pit, a giant, shimmering, gloriously unswimmable backyard ball pit. The logistics were indeed daunting, but the vision, the anticipated look on Patricia Langley's face when confronted with this reality, was too potent, too satisfying, to abandon. A flurry of frantic online searches commenced. Could one even rent enough plastic balls to fill a standard residential swimming pool? Apparently, yes. Companies specializing in large-scale event installations. Children's museum exhibits and corporate team building absurdity offered exactly what I needed. Calculating the approximate volume of my pool, factoring in displacement, I settled on a number, 20,000. 20,000 brightly colored, crush-proof commercial-grade plastic play balls. It was, to put it mildly, expensive, ludicrously so. The rental cost for the weekend, including rush delivery and subsequent pickup, was eye-watering. But picturing Patricia's perfectly orchestrated wedding day dissolving into confused chaos, the sight of it, priceless, worth every single penny. I contacted a reputable event supply company based out of Orlando, navigating a slightly bewildered customer service representative. Yes, 20,000. I confirmed calmly into the phone. Multicolored, standard 3-inch diameter .C crush-proof please. Delivered to a residential address in Oak Haven Estates, correct. For a private installation. There was a pause on the other end. Yes, I understand. It's unusual. No, it's not for a business, just a temporary landscape feature. I could almost hear the representative shrugging mentally before processing the order. Rush delivery was arranged for Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding. Pickup scheduled for Monday morning. Credit card processed. The die, or rather the plastic ball, was cast. Friday arrived, heavy with heat and anticipation. I spent the morning performing ostentatious, highly visible pool maintenance. I scrubbed the tile line with vigor. I vacuumed the pool floor meticulously. I tested the water chemistry with exaggerated care, ensuring everything looked perfectly prepared, pristine, inviting. Creating the illusion of compliance, perhaps even eager anticipation. Late that afternoon, right on schedule, the large delivery truck rumbled down my quiet suburban street, drawing curious glances from neighbors. The truck was loaded not with furniture or appliances, but with enormous, bulging mesh bags, each containing thousands of plastic spheres in lurid shades of neon green, electric blue, sunshine yellow, hot pink, and traffic cone orange. The two delivery guys, sweating profusely in the heat, exchanged baffled looks as they began unloading bag after enormous bag into my backyard. Stacking them near the pool deck, they completed the delivery efficiently, accepted my signature with raised eyebrows but no comment, and drove away, leaving me alone with a mountain of plastic potential. Next came the partial draining. Emptying the pool completely would take too long, risk damaging the plaster from sun exposure, and wasn't necessary for the plan. I needed just enough water removed to accommodate the volume of the balls without overflow, and a shallow layer of water might actually help the balls float better and prevent undue pressure on the pool floor drains. Using the submersible pump I kept for emergencies, I lowered the water level by about 3 feet, a significant but not total reduction. The sparkling blue surface now seemed distant, waiting. Then, the real labor began, one by one. I wrestled the heavy mesh bags to the edge of the pool deck, ripped them open, and began tipping cascade after cascade of brightly colored plastic balls into the water. It was an avalanche of plastic. Thousands upon thousands tumbled in, hitting the lowered water surface with a gentle splash before bobbing up, jostling against each other, spreading rapidly across the pool. It took hours. Sweat dripped into my eyes. My muscles ached, but the sheer, escalating absurdity of the visual fueled me. Slowly, magically, inevitably, the shimmering blue water vanished, submerged beneath a churning, roiling sea of buoyant primary colors. By the time dusk began to settle, painting the sky in soft pastels, my swimming pool was gone. In its place was a giant, inviting, utterly glorious, and completely unswimmable ball pit, filled nearly to the brim. The plastic spheres reflecting the twilight like a million misplaced jewels. Standing back, breathless, hands on my hips, surveying my creation. I had to chuckle. It was magnificent in its ridiculousness, a stroke of defiant, passive-aggressive genius. I quickly fashioned a small, tasteful sign on a simple wooden easel, placing it strategically near the back gate. Clearly visible from Patricia's yard, private ball pit, please enjoy the view responsibly. Saturday, wedding day, dawned oppressively bright and hot, fulfilling the weather forecast's promise of misery. The sounds drifting over the fence from Patricia's yard intensified, the rhythmic clang of tent poles being erected, the clatter of catering trays, the discordant tuning of a string quartet preparing for torture by heat stroke. Guests began to arrive in the early afternoon, pearls clutching, linen suits already wilting, faces flushed, paper fans fluttering uselessly against the thick, humid air. Background music started, Vivaldi warring with the cicadas. Forced laughter and strained chatter filled the air. The stage was set. Around 3:00 p.m., precisely when the sun reached its zenith, its rays beating down mercilessly, I saw the first predictable migration. Guests, clutching sweating glasses of champagne or iced tea, began to drift towards the back of Patricia's yard, drawn by the promise of shade near the fence line and, presumably, the anticipated unveiling of the cooling facility. They peered expectantly over the low fence towards my pool area. I retreated to my kitchen window, my preferred observation post, heart pounding a steady rhythm of nervous anticipation against my ribs. This was the moment of truth. Then came the main event, the bridal party's grand entrance to the reception area. Patricia, resplendent in an elaborate white gown, but her face already showing strain beneath the heavy makeup. Her new husband trailing slightly behind her, looking vaguely bewildered. Bridesmaids sweating elegantly in matching peach chiffon. Groomsmen visibly uncomfortable in their dark tuxedos. They processed with forced smiles towards the back fence, clearly intending this as a major reveal, a highlight of the guest experience. Patricia, playing the gracious hostess, gestured grandly towards my yard, her smile stretched taut across her face, ready to present the sparkling blue cooling facility she had so cleverly arranged for her cherished guests. A ripple went through the cluster of guests already gathered near the fence. Silence fell abruptly, then confusion. A few guests pointed, murmuring to each other. Whispers grew louder, carrying notes of disbelief and amusement. Patricia's practiced smile faltered, confusion clouding her features as she followed their collective gaze. Her eyes landed on the spectacle that occupied the space where my swimming pool should have been. The vast, undulating sea of 20,000 brightly colored plastic balls, shimmering and shifting gently in the almost non-existent breeze. Not a single drop of swimmable water visible, only plastic, endless, mocking plastic. The color drained precipitously from Patricia's face, leaving a ghastly pallor beneath her foundation. Her jaw dropped, slackening unbecomingly. Her eyes widened in stunned disbelief, then narrowed instantly into slits of dawning, incandescent rage. The carefully constructed facade of the serene, triumphant bride shattered into a million pieces. A strangled gasp escaped her lips, followed by a sound that hovered somewhere between a high-pitched shriek and a wounded sob. Her perfect wedding day, her meticulously planned guest comfort station, her hard-won neighborly cooperation, all obliterated, replaced by an enormous, cheerfully defiant pit of children's play balls. Forgetting her gown, her guests, her newly acquired husband, Patricia Langley whirled around, lifted her skirts, and stormed towards my property like a fury unleashed. She reached my locked back gate, and began rattling it violently, shaking it with surprising strength. "Mark Ashton, you open this gate. Open it right now. What have you done?" she screamed, her voice cracking, distorted with pure, unbridled fury. Several wedding guests, drawn by the commotion, followed her, morbidly curious, assembling along the fence line to witness the unfolding meltdown. Taking another deep, centering breath, I calmly walked out my back door and approached the gate, stopping a safe, deliberate distance away. "Patricia," I asked, my voice pitched with polite inquiry, deliberately neutral. "Congratulations on your wedding. You look lovely. Is there some sort of problem?" "A problem," she shrieked, rattling the gate again with such force I thought the latch might give. Look what you did. My guests are roasting out here. They need to swim. It's a health hazard. You filled your entire pool with balls." The last word came out as a strangled accusation. "Ah, yes, it's a ball pit," I corrected mildly, maintaining the calm demeanor that seemed to infuriate her further. "Quite festive, don't you think? Very popular at parties. I understand. Visually stimulating for your guests." I gestured pointedly towards my sign, as it says, "Please enjoy the view. Responsibly. Of course, it is private property, after all." "I told you I needed this pool," she raged, flecks of spittle flying. "Brenda told you. This is deliberate sabotage. You've ruined my wedding, my perfect day. I'll sue you for damages. I'll have the HOA fine you into bankruptcy. I'll see you driven out of this neighborhood. You'll do nothing of the sort." "Patricia," I interrupted, my voice hardening, shedding the polite neutrality, taking on a cold, firm edge. "Because this is my private property. I have the absolute right to fill my pool with water or plastic balls, or, should I choose, lime-flavored gel OYOU, and your representative, Miss Hofnagel, demanded access to my property. You threatened me with HOA retaliation when I rightfully refused. That constitutes harassment and attempted coercion. What I do with my own pool, on my own property, is exclusively my business. Perhaps your caterer could offer your guests some additional iced water, or maybe handheld fans." Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She looked genuinely capable of attempting to scale the fence. Her bewildered husband and a couple of flushed groomsmen finally reacted, rushing forward to gently but firmly restrain her, pulling her back from the gate as she continued to hurl insults, threats, and accusations at me, her voice echoing shrilly across the suddenly silent wedding reception. Guests stared, mouths agape. The string quartet had faltered into confused silence. Children pointed, wide-eyed, at the sea of colorful balls. A few older guests shook their heads slowly, murmuring disapproval, likely directed at Patricia's public meltdown, not my pool's contents. The carefully orchestrated elegance of Patricia Langley's perfect wedding day had irrevocably dissolved into a public spectacle of shrieking entitlement and thwarted desire, perfectly reflected back at her by a sea of 20,000 silent, brightly colored, mocking plastic balls. The rest of the wedding reception, by all accounts, limped towards its conclusion under a thick cloud of palpable awkwardness and rampant gossip. Patricia, after her explosive, highly public confrontation at my gate, reportedly retreated into her house in a state of near collapse, leaving her bewildered guests to mill about uncomfortably and her mortified new husband to make strained apologies. The giant ball pit remained throughout the afternoon and evening, a cheerful, silent, unavoidable testament to the battle of wills that had taken place. True to her vindictive nature, Patricia didn't let the matter drop. The following Monday morning, my mailbox contained not one, but 3 official-looking HOA violation notices, delivered with what I imagined was considerable spite. One cited me for unapproved structural modification of a swimming pool facility. Another accused me of creating an aesthetic nuisance detrimental to neighborhood visual harmony. The brightly colored balls apparently offended someone's delicate sensibilities. The third alleged I was maintaining a potential safety hazard attractive to minors, the ball pit itself. All 3 citations were formally signed by Patricia Langley, leveraging her title as social committee chair, clearly acting out of pure retaliatory fury rather than any legitimate concern for community standards or safety. I was prepared. I had anticipated this exact response. I immediately drafted a comprehensive, formal rebuttal addressed to the entire HOA Board of Directors, attaching copies of Patricia's transparently baseless citations. In my meticulously worded letter, I recounted the entire saga with precise dates and details, starting with Patricia's initial presumptuous comments regarding shared resources, escalating to the formal ultimatum delivered by her aggressive wedding planner, Brenda Hofnagel. I explicitly quoted Brenda's veiled threats concerning HOA retaliation should I refuse access to my private property. I described the installation of the ball pit as a temporary, non-damaging, defensive measure taken solely on my private property, specifically to prevent the threatened unauthorized use and potential trespass by her wedding guests. I argued that since the pool's structure remained entirely unchanged and the water beneath the balls was chemically treated and maintained, no modification had occurred. I systematically dismantled the aesthetic nuisance claim as subjective, retaliatory, and irrelevant given the temporary nature of the balls scheduled for pickup that very morning, as documented by the rental agreement I attached. I countered the safety hazard claim by stating the pool area was, as always, secured by locked gates, preventing unsupervised access, and argued that the only hazard presented was the one Patricia herself created by fostering an expectation among her guests that they could access a private, non-commercial swimming facility. Crucially, I included a notarized, sworn affidavit from my immediate next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a quiet, respected retiree who happened to be gardening near the fence line during the infamous confrontation with Brenda Hofnagel and had clearly overheard her ultimatum and threats. His corroboration, from a neutral third party, powerfully undermined Patricia's inevitable attempts to frame the situation as a simple misunderstanding or a reasonable request for neighborly cooperation. I concluded my letter by formally requesting the board dismiss all 3 of Patricia's citations as demonstrably retaliatory and filed in bad faith. Furthermore, I requested the board initiate a formal review of Patricia Langley's conduct, considering appropriate sanctions against her for harassment, abuse of committee authority, attempted coercion, and filing frivolous, vindictive complaints against a homeowner. The HOA board, faced with my detailed rebuttal, Mr. Henderson's damning affidavit, Patricia's flurry of citations, and now a growing number of separate complaints trickling in from other residents regarding the wedding itself, blocked driveways, late-night noise violations, trampled common area flower beds near her property line from guest parking and vendor traffic, found themselves navigating a rapidly escalating crisis. Patricia's actions, particularly the documented threats delivered by her planner, looked less like committee business and more like blatant bullying. Her immediate filing of multiple citations after being publicly thwarted screamed retaliation. Moreover, the additional complaints about the wedding logistics suggested a pattern of disregard for the very HOA rules she purported to champion. Patricia, it appeared, operated under the convenient belief that HOA regulations were flexible guidelines for herself, but rigid commandments for everyone else. the board, likely spurred by pressure from multiple residents and the potential legal exposure suggested by my complaint, launched a formal investigation, not just into my temporary ball pit or Patricia's retaliatory citations, but into the entire wedding event coordination and Patricia's use or misuse of her committee position. This investigation, initially focused on procedural violations and conduct unbecoming a board member, unexpectedly unearthed far more serious transgressions. It turned out the social committee, which Patricia chaired with autocratic control, had recently received its substantial annual budget allocation from the HOA General Fund, funds intended for organizing community events like the annual block party, holiday decorations, and neighborhood newsletters. Investigators, tasked with reviewing committee expenditures related to the wedding complaints, began cross-referencing vendor payments authorized by Patricia against invoices related to her personal wedding expenses. Several deeply suspicious transactions immediately leaped out. A large payment authorized by Patricia from the social committee account to a floral design consultant perfectly matched the final invoice Patricia received from her exclusive wedding florist. Another significant disbursement, coded as payment to an event logistics and coordination service, corresponded precisely, down to the penny, with the deposit Patricia had paid months earlier for the large, elaborate reception tent erected in her backyard. Further scrutiny revealed receipts submitted for reimbursement under the category of committee outreach supplies that included suspiciously large quantities of specific high-end liquors and gourmet food items identical to those prominently featured at the wedding bar and buffet tables. The conclusion was inescapable, supported by a clear paper trail. Patricia Langley had systematically used her unchecked authority as social committee chair to embezzle HOA funds, brazenly funneling thousands of dollars from the community budget to subsidize her lavish personal wedding reception. She had likely planned to obscure the transactions later through creative accounting, or perhaps slowly reimburse the funds before the next budget cycle. But the intense scrutiny brought upon her by the pool fiasco and the subsequent wedding complaints ripped the lid off her fraudulent scheme. The evidence, signed payment authorizations, committee budget reports bearing her signature, vendor invoices, bank transfer records, was comprehensive and undeniable. The HOA board, aghast at the discovery, immediately removed Patricia Langley from her board position, entirely pending formal removal by membership vote, which was now a certainty and, as legally required, turned all financial findings and supporting documentation over to the county prosecutor's office. Embezzlement, particularly the calculated theft of community funds by an elected HOA official entrusted with fiduciary responsibility, constituted a serious felony. Patricia Langley, already facing community censure and HOA sanctions over the pool incident and wedding chaos, now found herself the subject of a criminal investigation that dwarfed her previous transgressions. The legal process, in this instance, moved with surprising speed. Faced with irrefutable financial evidence, the paper trail was damning. Patricia's defense options were virtually non-existent. Attempting to fight the charges at trial would be ruinously expensive and almost certainly futile. She accepted a plea bargain offered by the prosecutor's office, pleading guilty to felony embezzlement. The presiding judge, taking into account the significant breach of trust placed in her by the Oakhaven Estates community, the calculated premeditation of the crime, and the lack of genuine remorse displayed, was not inclined towards leniency. Patricia Langley was sentenced to 18 months in state prison. Additionally, she was ordered by the court to pay full restitution to the Oakhaven Estates HOA for every dollar embezzled. plus substantial court fines and penalties. To secure this significant debt, liens were immediately placed on her property. Her marriage, launched under such dramatic and avaricious circumstances, reportedly crumbled quickly under the immense strain of the criminal conviction, financial ruin, and impending prison sentence. Within a year, while Patricia was still serving her time, the house at the end of the block, the one with the clear view of my pool, was sold at a county auction to satisfy the court-ordered liens and restitution payments. Cleaning 20,000 plastic balls out of a residential swimming pool, as it turns out, is a uniquely challenging and tedious logistical undertaking. It took several long, sweaty days and the cheerful, albeit slightly mocking, assistance of several good friends bribed with pizza and beer. But as the last brightly colored sphere was hauled away in the rental company's truck, revealing the pristine, undisturbed blue water beneath, it felt like more than just a cleanup. It felt like a cleansing, a restoration of order, not just to my pool, but to the neighborhood's equilibrium. Patricia Langley's reign of entitled tyranny, fueled by misused authority and culminating in criminal desperation, was definitively, conclusively over. Life in Oak Haven Estates settled back into a quieter, more reasonable rhythm. The HOA board, chastened and perhaps wiser, implemented significantly stricter financial controls, oversight procedures, and ethical guidelines for all committee members. Neighbors seemed to exhale collectively, becoming perhaps a little friendlier, a little less anxious, a little more inclined towards genuine community spirit rather than enforced compliance. My pool remained, as it always should have been, my private sanctuary, blissfully undisturbed, sometimes floating peacefully under the hot Florida sun. I'd recall the bizarre, surreal spectacle of the giant, shimmering ball pit, a ridiculous, expensive, yet ultimately triumphant defense against a neighbor whose sense of entitlement knew no boundaries, personal or legal. In the quiet defense of one's own small kingdom, it seems, sometimes you need 20,000 plastic balls to make a definitive, unarguable statement.